Well, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Remembrance Day. Well, it's not very happy, but you know what I mean. Remembrance Day, lest we forget. Anyway, so I did the recording of the ceremony that was going on in Ontario, and I had some comments about the fact that Trudeau had some of the people that attended mention certain political buzzwords like equality, inclusiveness, and let's do the right thing for the common good, meaning like not the time. We're here to remember the soldiers who fought for our freedom, to not be part of a certain World War II regime that forcibly sterilized people and brought out propaganda to force people to shame and condemn until they went and got forcibly sterilized. They even took their children from school and forcibly sterilized them. And then they took their children from them and then adopted them into Aryan families to assimilate them. Sounds like we're heading down the same road with this complacency in place. And of course, my Twitter's blowing up because, you know, I stand for truth and I stand with the Lord. And I know that the Lord would not want us to be putting all of our faith in pharmakia when we have Psalms 91 telling us that if we have unwavering faith, no plague or pestilence will come nigh us. Sounds like people don't read their Bibles anymore, which is what I'm sick and tired of. People not reading their Bibles and then telling me what the Bible says. You guys don't even know what the Bible says. You're quoting things out of your bums and you think that you're right and you think that you're accurate and you ain't. It will not stand up to the scriptures. It will not stand up to God. And on that day when you're judged, you're going to have to explain to him why you feared a pestilence over him. Because that's giving authority to fear and fear-mongering. And whatever's in the seat of authority, which is our fears and our thoughts, is not lining up with fear of God. And that's who you should be fearing. Oh, thank you, baby. Anyway, as I was saying, so Twitter's blowing up because of my few, well, it was just one comment. And, so yeah, now it's blowing up. I'm going to just ignore them because they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, God would have given them the intelligence to know how to give us a treatment that would work and be safe and effective. Sure, buddy. Yeah, that's called Psalms 91. And fearing the Lord because he's more powerful than any pestilence and plague on this planet.
He also gave us an immune system.
Yes, he also gave us a natural immune system which works just fine.
I'm as healthy as a horse.
My husband never gets sick.
Since the pandemic, I've never been sick.
Exactly.
Is that weird?
Not once. But me, I have an autoimmune disease, so I kind of catch whatever's going around. But I never caught the thing. Strange. If it was really everywhere and everybody's catching it and thousands of people died, how come I haven't caught it? I have an autoimmune disease and I catch everything. I caught strep throat because it was going around. I caught another cold and then they had bronchitis right afterwards.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
Baby.
I didn't mean to...
Anyway. And then they're going to tell me that, oh, well, it's killing everybody. I think those numbers are faked, for one. I think that the amount of people getting infected isn't as high as they say. I don't think I don't think that it's not real. I know that it's real. I just don't think it's as bad as they say it is. And I don't know anyone personally who's had it. No one. I don't know anyone personally who's died from it. No one. So, and considering I have a whole bunch of like on Facebook, I have about 4,000 friends. On Instagram, I have about 3,900 friends. On Twitter, I have about 100 and something. And on YouTube, I have however many. But I don't know one person from any of those social platforms who's had it and who's died from it. Not one. And the way that they're talking, it's so high that at least 20 out of every 1,000 people would have had it. So how is it possible that I don't know 60 people or 80 people who's had it? Not one. So either they're fudging the numbers, or they're fudging the numbers, because there's no explanation for how come I don't even know one person. Strange. However, I do know over 1,000 people who's been injured from getting there. Like I said, I know I have 4,000 friends on Facebook, and out of those 4,000 friends, I see posts every day. Pray for my mom. She's in the hospital because of an adverse reaction to her second. Pray for my sister's child who's in the hospital because he had a heart attack. Pray for my cousin who's in the hospital having life-threatening complications because of his booster. So, I could go on forever, and I've been sharing it in my story, so you can't say that I'm lying. But not one person has posted on my timeline or in my newsfeed, oh, I got it, and I'm in the hospital, and then the next RIP. Never. Not once. But I know of 1,000 who's been injured by this. But anyway, the point of today was to honor the dead soldiers. I have, as far as I know from my family's stories, my dad said that his father was in World War I, and my dad is like 84 years old, so his dad was... So it was like a long time ago. My dad's ancient almost. Anyway, so his father was in World War I. On my mom's side, my great-grandfather was in World War II. And her uncle was in the Korean War. So I have 3 family members who served in 3 different wars. And they fought so that I wouldn't have to be under a tyrannical regime that forces the citizens against the Constitution to do things that's not in the Constitution. So to say that is apparently disrespectful, even though it's the truth. I know veterans on both Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter who have voiced their opinions and said, don't wear a poppy if you have your mark and image because you're a coward. People have died and bled so that you wouldn't have to have those things to get around. This is a free country. Not free after you do this. It's free no matter what. That's what's in our Constitution. We are free to move around Canada without being searched and seized or whatever. We're allowed to choose our medical treatments and decline and reject medical treatments. That's in our Constitution. And under a free republic, we are allowed to not have this looming over our head that, oh, we have to show this just to get in here. And then there's like all these trolls coming out of the woodwork now, calling me a coward. A coward, why? Because I believe in the word of the Lord that says that I should put my unwavering faith in him and I will be protected, because I have been. I haven't caught it. I haven't had any complications from anything. I haven't had to go to the hospital in 7 years. Well, other than my gallbladder stones, which was about 4 years ago. So, was it 4 years ago? It will be 4 years in 2022, because it was in 2018 that I went for surgery. But it was in an outpatient. It was in an outpatient facility. It wasn't even in the hospital. So, yeah, 7 years. I haven't been in the hospital. So, yeah, Jim Patterson outpatient thing, whatever, in Surrey. That's where I got my gallbladder removed. So, I wasn't even in the hospital. For 7 years, I haven't had to go to the hospital for flu or infection or virus or anything, because I've been protected. And ever since I came to the Lord, I've been extra protected. So I don't know what these people are talking about, that the Lord put this information and this intelligence in the scientists to make this thing. No, that was Satan. That was Satan. Not God. God would have us humble ourselves and put our face to the floor and pray to him for protection. Y'all deceived. I ain't no coward. In fact, if I was a coward, I would have already bowed to what was it? They're already bowed to peer pressure and shaming and cancel culture and all this other crap that's been going on for months and 2 years almost already since I've come to Christ. I have never seen so much trollisms. Wow. Y'all just never stop. It's just like daily. Like all day sometimes. It's ridiculous. So yeah. I stood up for freedom. I stood up for the Lord. I stood up for truth. And I stood up for everyone's right to choose. Because my body, my choice. Can't say that unless it's completely true for everything to do with your body. I believe in freedom of autonomy, bodily autonomy. I believe in freedom of religion. I believe in freedom to move freely without being searched or asked for papers. I believe in a free republic. I believe in democracy. So the majority of people who are outraged and protesting should be heard. But we're not. We're silenced and censored. And now Trudeau vows that he's going to make sure that misinformation and what was it? Hate speech, he called it, is going to be squashed on the internet. Good luck with that, because, we're not intelligent enough to get around that with, new language. So, I already have new language, but I can always change depending on the upgraded buzzwords. So, yeah, there's that today. But I want to say thank you to everyone who served in the Army and served in military and Air Force and Navy and all sectors of military. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. And I stand with you and your freedom. I stand with you. And I am very sorry for today's disruptions that happened over politics. Trudeau being late, that was a disgrace in itself. The fact that somebody called in a bomb threat, I am so sorry. That was disgraceful and hurtful. And then all the vandalism on the memorial in the Kootenay, or was it Kelowna? Kootenay or Kelowna? I'm very sorry. Very, very sorry. Love you all. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.
In Flanders fields, the poppies grow. Today we honor the brave men and women in uniform who have served our country. Since 1919, Canadians have commemorated this day, and over a century later, we continue to pay tribute to our veterans, to those injured in the line of duty, and to those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our liberty. These Canadians represent the very best of what it means to be Canadian. So today, wear a poppy, attend your local cenotaph ceremony, take part in a moment of silence, learn more about our military history. Remember, our country's freedom came at a great cost. We have much to be thankful for as Canadians, but much to remember as well, lest we forget.
The woke left tried their very hardest to ruin and to cancel Canada Day this year. Let's not let them ruin Remembrance Day too. I'm Candace Malcolm, and this is The Candace Malcolm Show. Hi, thank you so much for tuning into the program. It's great to have you with us. Now, if you have been following the news, if you've been following our reports at True North, you know about the controversy when it comes to the flag. The flag was lowered to be taken down to half-mast at the end of May. So we're talking about 6 months ago. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, said, let's lower the flags in commemoration. At the time, we just learned about an apparent discovery of unmarked graves at a residential school near Kamloops, British Columbia. So the band leader came out, said that they had evidence and proof of unmarked graves of children who had attended the residential schools. As you know, it created an incredible media backlash. Several other bands came forward with their own claims of unmarked graves, and basically the country went into mourning. There was this great shame cast over all Canadians, and these really, really wild accusations that say that basically Canada committed genocide. Canada committed genocide. Canada was a genocidal state, that the residential schools were not aimed at with the intention of educating people and lifting them out of poverty, but the intention of those residential schools was simply to kill everybody. That's basically the accusation that has been leveled against Canada by the woke left. And Justin Trudeau just sort of shrugged and said, let's just lower these flags down to half-mast. This is totally unprecedented for the flags to be lowered down in commemoration of a historical event, and also to be remain lowered for this long. So more and more people were calling for those flags to go up. They finally did go up, mostly just so that they could go down again on Remembrance Day. And so I think that's at least a good sign. Okay, we're coming together as a country. We're saying, look, some really bad things happened in the past. The residential schools were a horrible abuse of power and a terrible program that has gone wrong, that went wrong. I don't defend it in any way. However, I don't think that the intent of it was to kill people. I think the intent of it was good. They wanted to educate people. Unfortunately, you know, this one-size-fits-all policy where they took children out of their homes and forced them into residential school, bad idea. Lots of bad things happened. Lots of bad outcomes. Okay, so because of this, because of the sort of discovery and this sort of public awakening that we've had when it comes to the woke left demanding that every Canadian concede to this point that we committed genocide, that Canadians are genocidal, that our country is built on this horrible legacy, that we're all white supremacists, that we have to decolonize our country. They did their best to try to ruin our country's national holiday on Canada Day. As you recall, there were huge efforts to cancel Canada Day, and it worked. And it worked. Some politicians were just so afraid to speak back against the mob, to tell them what they're saying is wrong, that they allowed it. They canceled their own ceremonies, that they tried to equate all of Canada's history to this one program that was a failed program, and because of it, we just didn't get to do Canada Day in the same way. I mean, let me just say that most Canadians ignored that. Most Canadians still went out and enjoyed their freedom and, you know, and celebrated with fireworks and with friends and drinks and all the things that we love to do on July 1st, on Dominion Day or Canada Day. But there was that movement, and there was sort of an ugly shadow that was looming over us all during Canada Day. Well, we sort of have the same moment now with Remembrance Day, where for some reason, instead of the whole country coming together to honor the good good parts of our history, to honor the people who sacrificed for our freedom, some of the great accomplishments that Canada has had on a military front to keep the entire world safe. Instead of talking about that, the same shame is sort of looming over us once again. The same woke forces are trying to cancel Canada Day. And so I wanted to bring on a guest today on the program to help us understand this phenomenon and really how we can push back and fight against it. So I am joined by Mark Milke. Dr. Mark Milke is a public policy analyst, keynote speaker, author, columnist, and an author of 6 books. His most recent book is called The Victim Cult. I really recommend you check it out. It is excellent. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Candace.
Well, so Mark, it's Remembrance Day. This is a time where Canadians usually reflect upon our history, where we honor those who have sacrificed for our country. But then there is this sort of looming, guilt that Canadians are meant to feel about some of the revelations about our history, some of the darker moments of our history. So let me ask you this: you're a historian. You're very well versed in Canadian history. Do you think Canadians have reason to be proud? And how can we push back against some of the naysayers who say that we should just sort of feel this eternal guilt about being Canadian?
Yeah, absolutely. We should feel proud. And I think the core problem in what you're seeing today, this notion that we can't celebrate Canada, is actually utopian. I mean, I wrote about this in The Victim Cult, but if you look at the past, or the last century rather, the ideologues and the utopians were at least looking forward, right? I mean, the Marxists were dead wrong in economics, but they thought they could create this new perfect world in the future. And now we're beset by ideologues and utopians who look past to the past and wonder why it wasn't perfect. Well, because you live in an imperfect planet with imperfect people. So the notion that we can't celebrate Canada is compared to what? Compared to a utopia of one's imagination of the past or the present or the future, or who? First Nations in Canada, who, let me be blunt. I mean, look, everyone should be remembered fondly for their service to Canada, their contribution to Canada on this day. But there was really no people group in the history of the planet, for the most part, that wasn't involved in, for example, slavery, including in British Columbia and including before, what people like to call settlers. Most of us and most of our ancestors came. So there's no perfect history, and that's part of the problem today. Is people somehow weirdly expect that history and those in it should have been perfect.
Right. Well, there's this we're in this weird moment, Mark, where we're supposed to really carefully reflect upon, Canadian history and all of the wrongs that have been done by Canadians. But to your point, the history of the sort of pre-European history in North America is really largely undiscussed and undiscovered. I remember you wrote an interesting piece not too long ago, I think it was in the Orca, where you talked about how prior to Europeans, the idea that First Nations were peaceful and loving is totally wrong, that they were quite cruel and barbaric in some ways. Like you mentioned, the history of slavery is really something that people don't know much about. What I've noticed recently is that we can't even really discuss the history of migration when it comes to First Nations people, because when I was in school, we were taught that people came across the Bering Land Bridge. Maybe it was prior to an ice age, but still, maybe thousands of years ago, maybe more than that, maybe less than that. But it seems now that there's this weird notion where that none of this history is even discussed. It's like politically incorrect or something. So why is it that some history is so important to dissect and look through and revisit, whereas other history is completely brushed over and forgotten?
Well, history has become politicized. So whenever politics gets into history, it's no longer honest history. And I think it's become, a weapon. It's been weaponized from some ideologues. Look, if I came from a culture that had been recently abused, or my ancestors have been abused, and again, everyone's has, if you go back far enough, I'd probably be sensitive as well to criticism of, say, my culture. But I think the problem is no one owns the past, no one owns history, no one owns even one's own ethnicity or culture. What happened happens. The question is, how do you get to a better spot today? Which is, where I like to go. But I think you also have to start in honesty in the past. So yes, I think obviously, if I was an Indigenous Canadian, I'd be pretty upset that, the vote was removed and wasn't restored until 1960. But I think part of what we're facing today is this weird dynamic where social media can amplify a past tragedy.
And there are all sorts of past tragedies that can be amplified. But if you think pre-social media, I mean, let's go back to the 1970s. I don't know if you were around, but I was a kid. But or the 1980s or even the early 1990s, really before the internet took off, you would have to have, say, major newspapers or news hour broadcasts at 6 p.m., say in the United States, the big three, pound on a story again and again and again to make it, really, give it life day after day, like the Watergate hearings, right? Because there was something new every day. Weirdly, now that with social media, that we can extract an event out of the past, and again, there's no shortage of tragedies, and say, well, this is the reason I am the way I am today, or my group is the way I am today. That's actually really dangerous. It's a false cause and effect link. But I think there's some of that happening today as well. I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I mean, that's part of the dynamic I think that we're seeing. And we have to think carefully about really dragging the past out to beat up the present.
Right, and to the point that you make in the victim cult is that it's not helpful. I mean, to people who come from a group that has been marginalized or that have been victimized, it's good to acknowledge that. But does it really help them move on? Thinking of some of these new concepts, these new woke concepts that we hear about, like white privilege, the sort of idea that is undergrained is that white people have more power, and that's a very dangerous message to be putting out in society, because it can give people of all different backgrounds a really bad idea of what the real world is. If you're not white, you might think, oh, no matter how hard I try, I'm never going to succeed. And if you are white, you might think, oh, I'm going to coast through life and everything's going to be easy for me. And both of those things are obviously wrong. And so a part of it is like, how do we come together as a country and make sure that there is equal opportunity and that all people are treated fairly now, and make sure that people who are still in poverty, people who live in some of these really remote reserves, have the opportunities that they should have in a country like Canada. Mark, how do we make our country better amidst this whole sort of woke left guilt trip that we're in the middle of?
Well, I think you're onto something, and what you mentioned earlier about remembering history. So again, I'm fully in favor of remembering history. All of it: the bad, the good, the warts, the ugly. But I think part of it is, again, reminding people that, first of all, no one's ancestors are pure. You go back far enough, and everybody's got a black sheep in the family, their ancestral or ethnic or national tree. But also, remembering the good parts of history. Like, it's not as black and white as people think. One of the articles, I think you referenced it a moment ago, that I wrote a few months ago in the Orca, was about British Columbia's history. And I came across this book about the history of Black Canadians, written in the early 1970s. And it had some real gems. It actually talked about, for example, there was a migration in the late 1850s, early 1960s, of hundreds of Black Californians to Victoria. And they were actually warmly accepted by the local Anglican church, by the local governor at the time. I think it was James Douglas. And they wrote back to their, to other, friends and relatives in California, saying what a wonderful place Victoria was. And of course, like everybody who moves to Victoria, they even then bragged about the gardens, or, the pleasant, climate and the rest of it. But this was 1860. And oddly enough, or ironically enough, the intolerance towards some Black immigrants to Canada in Victoria came a little bit later, when there was more American immigration from California and elsewhere of whites. Because there was, they're in the middle of the Civil War, or about to enter it, or exiting it, depending on the period you're talking about. But Anglican Canadians in, the British Empire in early 1860s, they were welcoming to Blacks. And in fact, they were encouraged to run for office. They were given citizenship. I think it was after 9 months or something like that, or certainly allowed to run for office even after 9 months. And so, there's no perfect history, and there's, black spots on the history of Canada for sure. But I think part of combating the nonsense today is to kind of virtually shake people a little bit and say, again, you're kind of missing the point if you think this group, has some sort of moral advantage over this group. As you know, from the victim cult, I quoted Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous Soviet dissident, and he talks about how it's common for people to say, if only you are removed from this situation, or, taken out, in communist, dictatorships of his era, if only we remove this person, life will be better. And we see that person as evil. And what he said was, no, the line between good and evil runs between, is in each human heart. It's in each one of us, that line, that dividing line. And so it's actually hubris for anyone to suggest that, again, we can't celebrate Canada because someone in 1867, a 19th century imperialist, was a 19th century imperialist. Well, I would hope we could take stuff from First Nations history and celebrate it, regardless of the fact that, yes, First Nations practiced slavery in British Columbia when the British tried to stamp it out, including James Douglas, who in one case bought a slave to free that slave in around 1850 and tried to wipe out slavery in British Columbia during his tenure, and wasn't exactly successful. It lasted until the late 1890s in British Columbia because the region was so remote at that time. So long answer to short question. I mean, I think telling the truth about history, in other words, getting people to think a little more modestly about everyone's history might be part of the remedy.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, and again, something that we don't often hear about. We often hear about how the British had slaves, held slaves, or the Americans held slaves. We don't often hear about how it was the British and then the Americans who were the sort of the earliest people in the world to stop slavery and to fight against those who continued to carry slaves. I totally agree with your point, Mark, that we need to do more to celebrate First Nations people and history and their contributions. One of the things that happened this year is that there was a second sort of Veterans Day, First Nations Veterans Day, or I think it's called Indigenous Veterans Day, that fell a couple days before Remembrance Day. And for me, I would prefer that we celebrate all together. We're all one country. Our contributions came together, whether it was in the First World War, Second World War, Korea, Afghanistan, wherever it was, we were fighting together. But to your point, perhaps having a second dedicated day to First Nations contributions might help Canadians learn more of those stories. What's your take on that? Do you think it's a good idea to have these two separate days?
But I don't like separate ceremonies. The acerbic comedian, American comedian Bill Maher, has ripped a strip off of colleges and universities in the United States that have separate Black graduation ceremonies. Because I mean, really he said, welcome back to separate but equal, right? And I think it's the same danger here. Add to history, let's help people remember it. I mean, I just wrote a column for the Calgary Herald on Winston Churchill, remembering Winston Churchill properly. And the co-author was Kelvin Van Esch, who's half Mohawk. His father's Mohawk, his mother's Dutch German. And he hates identity politics because, as he told me in a personal call, and I don't think he minds, me saying this. I mean, what's he supposed to do? Look down on his mother because she's white? So this is a really dangerous precedent. We have separate this, separate that. I mean, the ideal of liberal democracy isn't bad. It is that you look at people as individuals only in law and policy, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, rich, poor, your background, your ethnicity, your nationality. What happened to your ancestors, what your ancestors did to my ancestors. When you get before a court of law, when you apply for a government program, when you're in the unemployment line or whatever it is, you're treated as an individual. And unfortunately, we're going away from that focus on the individual to, again, celebrating us because of whatever. The danger in that, Candace, is none of us can change our skin color. None of us can change, much else about how we were born or our history. And I think it's, people often make the same mistake in history and repeat the same evil, and sometimes from the best of intentions. So they think, well, to make up for past wrongs, we need to kind of discriminate against someone now. I mean, think about the illogic of that. So let's suppose you're, I don't know, the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, and somehow because you got the wrong skin color in an application for employment today to the federal government, because you're not the right color or ethnicity, you may lose out the job. I mean, to even discuss it, to even have that, I think is so offensive to the notion of treating individuals as individuals. And that's the danger, is we're trying to correct the past, in quotes, by making up for it in the present. And you can't. Now, look, there's some, if you step on my toe, Candace, and, or hit me, your car drives into mine and it's your fault. Well, you're on the hook for repairing my car, or, I don't know, my medical bill for my foot, if this wasn't Canada and it wasn't public healthcare. But beyond like pretty clear cause and effect links, the Japanese, their properties confiscated, we owed them after that confiscation in the 1950s for what we did in the 1940s, or what Canada did. But beyond clear cause and effect links and recent cause and effect links, it's really dangerous to go down this road of your group was, unkind to my group, and we're going to now punish your group in the present, as if anybody alive today had anything to do with slavery, abolished in the United States in 1865, or practically abolished in Canada in 1820, and in the entire British Empire of 1833, in fact. So it's a very dangerous road we're going down. So again, I think it's helpful to remember that you want to help people as individuals. If you're poor, we have a government program to help you out, that sort of thing. But to stay away from identity politics. Again, my friend Kelvin, who wrote this op-ed about, Indigenous soldiers, by the way, we added that to the column. 3 Indigenous soldiers that deserve celebration. That's the way to do it. You celebrate together, and we've come a long way to try and get to that point. And it's really moving backwards to have separateness in any form or fashion.
Well, that's very well put, and I appreciate it. Just final question for you, Mark. It's Remembrance Day. Is there any one specific moment in history or any one story that you like to reflect on, you like to think about on Remembrance Day? You just mentioned a column that you wrote about some First Nations moments, so maybe you can share one of those with us.
Well, sure. And, one of the soldiers, so we had 3 names in the column, and it's not in front of me, but one was an Indigenous soldier born in Saskatchewan, was the first Edmonton police officer of First Nations ancestry, and later went off to fight in the First World War, and was a runner. In fact, he was also the first Indigenous person in Canada to compete in the Olympics. Ended up being a runner because of his physical prowess in World War I. Tragically died in 1917. But that's the kind of thing we can celebrate and point to, and we should. So that's what we did in our column. And if you look up the column at either markmilky.com or the Calgary Herald, and look for Mark Milky and Kelvin Van Esch, you'll see the column there about the Indigenous service in our nation's history.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, I encourage everyone to go out and do that. And thank you, Mark, for joining us on Remembrance Day. I hope you have a wonderful day reflecting and doing whatever you do on Remembrance Day. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Candace.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Candace Malcolm, and this is The Candace Malcolm Show.
November 11th, the most unforgettable day of the year. A message from the Government of Canada.
The Royal Newfoundland Regiment was almost fully wiped out.
Mon régiment, la chaudière, la première heure, 2 heures, ou peut-être 3-4 heures, en tout et partout, on a perdu 113 hommes la première journée.
Yeah, we were surrounded on the hills at Kabeya, and there was a lot of fire. We were pretty out of ammunition and out of food too.
And no, it was like CNN called it at the time, the most dangerous place on earth.
Remembrance Day, we're a generation that, we have the most recent conflict that we're veterans, that part of the current generation, right now. I can't imagine what it was like to be in the other generations.
Est-ce que vous célébrez toujours? Est-ce que vous commémorez toujours le jour du souvenir?
Oui. Ah oui. Ça, c'est une journée sérieuse. On pense à tout ce monde-là. C'est pour ça qu'il faut apprécier la liberté parce qu'elle a coûté cher.
These are my father's medals. Every Remembrance Day or special day for the forces, I always carry my dad's medals. I marched with him on Remembrance Day. And he marches with me.
November 11, I think of course, all the losses and everybody that served their country. And it is a special day. It's always a bit of a difficult day because I get a bit emotional thinking about all these people. So
I enjoyed my stint in the army. I enjoyed it. I lost a lot of friends over there. I lost a lot of friends over there. Right.
Je vais toujours sur la parade d'armistice. Et puis, là, ben, tu peux pas faire autrement qu'à penser que ce qui s'est produit.
I think it's necessary to remember what you've been through and those who didn't come back. But especially those who didn't make it.
Afghanistan and beyond. From Europe to Korea and from the Atlantic Ocean to Afghanistan and beyond. Millions of Canadians have served this country in uniform. It doesn't matter who they were or where they served. Every single one of them has a story worth telling. It's important that we take some time to remember those who served, fought, and gave their lives for the freedom we're able to enjoy today. Their duty was to protect us, and our duty is to make sure that we never forget. That's what Remembrance Day means to me, lest we forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, the levels of cognitive dissonance have shown.
She's saying what's true.
Hey, lady, take a look at these.
Hey, climb up.
This is not the day.
Get her out of there.
Come on, Dad, let's go. Not about you.
A veteran once said, if they ask you for your papers, they have already forgotten.
Not the right time, not the right place.
It is the right time. I believe that Remembrance Day has more significance than all the ones we've had since World War II. As many of us here realize, we are in the midst of World War III.
How freaking dare you?
Oh no, you're pulling the plug.
This is about freedom.
Who are you?
This is not about you. This is about the veterans.
Who are you exactly?
No, you're disgracing this ceremony.
Who are you?
You're a disgrace.
Shame on you for doing that.
I'm fighting for the freedom that our soldiers died for. Have you forgotten? You have forgotten. You have forgotten. The veteran said, if they ask you for your papers, we've already...
Why don't you fuck it off?
Time for you to go. Guys in the war. Came here to shot over Germany. I have a right to be here as well. You're ordering him. Yeah, you're right.
In all thy son's command, With glowing hearts we see thee rise. Our true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
With glowing heart we see thee ride, for true north strong and